Today we're taking a look at a budget build for the Wizard. Going to be going over both Archon and crit mass and telling you which build is best for what. So let's get started. Hey, what's up you guys? It's Jaded and I'm going to jump right into what I went ahead and purchased for this build. Now I try to keep all these budget builds around 10 mil, give or take a little here and there if necessary. And the reason for that is, 10 mil might seem a lot to some people, but really, if you look at it from a real money auction house standpoint, 10 mil is like half an hour of work. So that's why I feel like it's within reach for a lot of people. And the 10 mil range is usually miles better than, say, going 10 mil to 100 mil. Going like 2 mil to 10 mil is a huge leap. So before we get into the auction house stuff, I just want to say that I went ahead and put together a crit mass build. Now, the difference between a crit mass build and an Archon build is crit mass needs specific stats. It needs arcane power on crit, and even max arcane power really helps it a lot. Whereas if you're going an Archon build is strictly, all resist and then just getting as much damage as you can. And that's really it. You don't need any max arcane power, any arcane power on crit, anything like that. So that's why I went for the crit mass build. Now, the difference between these two builds, Archon and crit mass, with Archon, it's low monster power farming. You want to do this when you're solo and you're just plowing away, monster power 0, trying to get XP as fast as possible, and trying to get loot as fast as possible. With crit mass, on the other hand, is for much higher monster power when you need to crowd control everything, better in party scenarios where you're doing Ubers, chain locking things down with Frost Nova, really benefits everybody. But the trade-off is it's not very efficient in low monster power levels because you're killing stuff so fast, you're not getting those crit procs, and that's really where this build thrives, is in high HP scenarios where you're not killing everything super fast. Now let's take a look at the actual auction house, and I'm going to show you guys what to itemize for. And again, this is going to be for the crit mass build, but later on I'm going to show you what to drop in, drop out for Archon. Starting with the two most expensive pieces that I went for, the weapons, your main hand, your offhand, these are very important. And starting with Chantota's Will here, the main hand, the reason I went for this and the reason you see it so popular is the attack speed. This particular one has attack speed on it. You don't necessarily need that, but it can definitely help. Now the reason attack speed is so critical to the crit mass build is because the faster you attack, the more Frost Novas you're able to get off, the faster crits you're able to get, the more procs, and it just kind of feeds the whole build together so that it feels very fluent and you're not running into problems where you can't keep something chain stunned. Now in the end, I ended up with more than enough attack speed. I didn't really need the attack speed on this. I could have went for crit damage or a socket. If you're going to do that though, I'd say on a budget, you're going to want to go for the crit damage over the socket. It's typically a lot cheaper and you can get a higher DPS weapon, and you're not going to be spending millions on a gem anyways. So I just pick one up with like 60% crit damage on it. Now for the offhand, I went for the Oculus. This isn't necessary. You can really pick up anything for your offhand as long as it has crit chance, arcane power on crit, and a decent range of average damage. Everything else is really just icing on the cake. High intelligence, a socket. This one has increased damage against elites, which is whatever, and reduced cooldown on teleport. But anything can work. Get a rare, get Taurashas, get Chantotas if you can afford it. Chantotas are very expensive though to complete the set because it has that attack speed on it as well as everything else. So priority is to make sure you get the crit chance and the arcane power on crit. And of course, max arcane power is quite nice to have with this build as well. Onto the helmet now. I found that Andario's Visage is it's so much bang for your buck. When you're going for a budget build, Andy's helmet is just so amazing. The only downside is you take more fire damage. That's it. So if you can keep out of fire, definitely pick one of these up. All resist on it is what I went for. I feel like that's one of the better stats that you can get on this. You can get a socket, you can get intelligence being like 200 and vitality for very cheap as well. But I felt like, you know, the all resist is much more needed here, because in a lot of other areas we're skipping on all resist. So that's what I went for personally. But there's a little leeway there. You can also pick up a rare. You could pick up Mempos. But Andes is going to be hard to beat at this price. So on to gloves here. Really what you want are trifecta gloves. And, you know, get int, get vitality if you can. Try to get crit chance at least 6. Crit damage is really whatever you can get on it. And the more attack speed, the better. These were the best that I found in terms of how much DPS I'm going to get out of them for the price range. Again, it's whatever's on the auction house at the time, and you kind of have to make your own decision on that. For boots, really normal here, you know, int, vite, all resist, movement speed. Of course, try to get movement speed if you can. For the bracers, you're going to want to get about 80 int, about 80 vitality, 60 all resist, 4.5 or so crit chance. And as time goes on, you know, better bracers are going to be cheaper. I picked these up for 300k, but maybe 300k a month from now, these are going to be much, much higher stats for that same price. So you just got to look and see what's on the market. Your belt and your shoulder are going to be very basic. Just try to get as much int as you can, try to get as much vite as you can, and all resist, and that's really it. Of course, armor, strength, things like those, you know, one single resist, those all help. For the belt, typically you can get a lot of vitality here, and it can be very, very cheap. And likewise for the shoulders, but I opted for some higher int ones. It really just depends, again, what's on the market. You can get percent life on these. Just look around, see what's good. For the chest, I opted for Tau Rashas. Again, very, very high attack speed is necessary for this build. And I got a really good deal on this one. Not only did it have very good int roll on it, but it was cheaper than like everything else. So I got a good deal there. And for pants, again, very basic, just get your sockets. Try to get a lot of vitality here and around 90 or so int. Again, depends on your sockets on this one. But of course, get that all resist as well. I didn't go for Blackthorns because you're looking at many millions, you know, at least 2 million, and you're losing out on all resist. And typically you're losing out on a lot of other stats as well. So I felt like it wasn't really worth it in the budget section. But of course, as you get more money, you might want to look into Blackthorn's pants. Now, last but not least, we have jewelry, starting with the amulet here. This is as basic as it gets. You want to get a decent amount of crit chance, at least somewhere around 6 to 7. And crit damage doesn't matter too much. Just try to get as much as you can. It really depends on, again, what's on the auction house. I decided to go for average damage because it turns out that it's just way more DPS than intelligence will give you. If you get this same necklace without the average damage and with 80 int, it's not going to be nearly as good. So keep that in mind when looking at jewelry. And what I like to do when I'm looking at average damage is put it in slot 1 so that it sorts it by average damage in the auction house. But the reason this is so good is it tells you the actual average damage that you're looking at, because that number can be a little deceptive on jewelry if it rolled it twice, like if it rolled min damage as well as a range damage, things like that. It can get a little weird. So that helps you see like the true value behind that number. Now onto rings. This is where I picked up my life on hits. You're gonna want somewhere around at least like 600 life on hit. You don't get hit that much with crit mass, but range stuff is always gonna be poking at you. So, you know, having some life on hit, having some sustain, always a bonus. You can get life steal on your weapon as well, but I opted for the life on hit here. And because there's no other great spot to get life on hit other than maybe your amulet, you're gonna wanna get as much as you can on your rings. So get your crit chance, get your crit damage, get your average damage, and get that life on hit. Now, one of these rings does have attack speed. It really just depends what you need. If you need more attack speed for that crowd control, or if you just want more crit damage for the damage, I would pick up rings last and kind of assess what you need in that situation. And finally, we're going to take a look at the skills. So this is the crit mass build. This is very cookie cutter. The only thing that you might want to change around is teleport. I've been using Safe Passage. Just gives you 30% less damage taken for 4 seconds. You know, as you get your CC chain going and get the crits rolling, it's kind of nice to have that little buffer. but you can use Fracture, you can use Wormhole for more teleports. And I would also recommend swapping it out for slow time if you're in a party setting. A lot of people will opt for stretch time, which gives you 10% more attack speed to anyone standing in it. That'll help you and your friends not only do more damage, but also sustain better. You know, it's not just a DPS increase, but if you want straight the most damage increase possible, you want to use Time Warp. The only downside is mobs can kind of have a tendency to move around, and people can teleport around and stuff like that. So it's not always the best, but you know, it really depends like what Uber boss you're going after, or what act you're farming, and all that. Other areas to swap out skills, you can change energy armor for storm armor if you know, your defense is fine. Storm armor is a huge DPS increase, and I don't know too much about it, but what I've seen is people using shocking aspect if you just want flat damage. But if you want more movement speed, you can also throw in scramble and speed up your runs. Frost Nova also has a couple options here. You can use Deep Freeze if you want more crit chance. If you hit 5 targets, you get 12-second crit chance boost. Or you can use Bone Chill as well if your crit chance is fine and you just want like a little bit more damage on your spells. And you want to use Cold Snap if you're noticing that you can't keep stuff, you know, chain CC'd. So this will help reduce that cooldown. Now for passes, I really like Astral Presence. You know, the max arcane power, a little bit more arcane regeneration, I think is nice compared to all the other options. I'm using Cold Blooded. I've seen other people use Glass Cannon or Blur if they need, you know, way more defense. Other than that, I mean, Energy Twister with Wicked Wind, Diamond Skin with Crystal Shell, and Explosive Blast with Chain Reaction, those are all very necessary skills and runes to have for this. And of course, Crit Mass as your passive. Now moving on to an Archon build here. There's so many Archon builds that I have seen. People like different primaries, a lot of different passives, different Archon runes. So there's a whole lot of freedom, I feel like, with the Archon, and you really have to pick and choose what you want, test things out, look around for other people doing Archon specs. You know, I'm not going to have the best one that will suit you 100%. But basically, you want to pick a primary that you like. So here I have Fork Lightning with Electrocute. Archon with Teleport, I like using Teleport because it gets you from point A to point B faster. And, you know, my passive also works with that, which we'll get to in a second. But you can also use Improved Archon, which just flat up increases your damage of Archon form. Diamond Skin's only going to be used outside of Archon form. You know, when you lose the buff, you need some stuff to get you by until the next Archon cooldown's up. So that can help. Familiar with Spark Flint, this is really the only rune I see being used for this. It's just going to increase your damage a little bit, as well as Magic Weapon. And I'm using Blood Magic because it gives you a little bit of lifesteal. But I've also seen people use Force Weapon if they don't need that. And then finally, Storm Armor with Scramble. This is just increasing your movement speed. Movement speed, very important in Archon form. You don't have a whole lot of teleporting around very fast. So movement speed, very important. I would suggest getting 24% on your items as well, because it can mean the difference between keeping Archon up and then dropping the buff and you know, having to wait for it to come up again. Now onto passives here. Galvanizing Ward. You really only use this just to increase the duration of your armor buff. Because when you're in Archon form, you can't recast that stuff. You have to click out of it and rebuff it. So this is why that's used and why that's so popular. Glass Cannon, again, this build is all about trying to do as much damage as possible and just insta-giving mobs. And then the final passive I like to use is Illusionist. And this will reset the cooldown if you get hit while you're in Archon form on that teleport. So you can actually walk up to mobs and get hit on purpose just to reset that cooldown and then kill everything. But other than Illusionist, you know, you might want to check out Blur if you need the defense. I see people use Crit Mass, but it doesn't really serve a whole lot of purpose. It doesn't lower the cooldown of Archon or the teleport. But you really have free range to do whatever you want in this slot. Now before I wrap this up, I just wanted to go over a few pieces of gear that I would change just to make Archon a little bit better. Because with Archon, you don't need things like max arcane power on crit. It's really just all about getting the most damage that you can, and as well as getting movement speed, getting all resist, getting vitality, all those things. So just really quick here, I want to go over what I would swap out in my crit mass gear if I was going for an Archon build. Starting with the bracers, you could swap these out for Lucunis to get that extra movement speed. Again, movement speed very important in Archon. You want to get that 24%. Other than the movement speed though, they're not very good. You're probably going to lose a bunch of stats just to get that movement speed, but it can be worth it. It really just depends on your playstyle. I might want to swap out Tal Rasha's chest just to get more defensive stats, especially if you're going for something like Lucunis. You're going to need to make up that defensive stat somewhere else. For the offhand, I would go with the Triumvirate. This has a lot of elemental damage added on top. And like I said, you don't need all these extra stats that the Oculus has. So you just get a Triumvirate. It's going to boost your DPS a lot. And to combo with that, you're going to want a black damage weapon because it has all that elemental damage. And if you didn't know, whenever something has adds 6% poison damage, you're going to want a black weapon. It just increases that DPS even more. It's just how it works. So I'd pick up any one-hander, just make sure it has lifesteal on it, make sure it has crit damage, make sure it has a socket, and make sure it's a black damage weapon, meaning all physical damage. And I've even noticed some people really like the Templar for the Archon build as well, so that's another thing to try out if you find yourself dying a lot. So that's going to do it for the budget wizard guide. If I missed anything or you guys want to add something, be sure to leave it in the comments. Wizard's definitely one of the easier classes to gear up for very, very high monster power levels due to just the amount of crowd control that you have. But hopefully you guys enjoyed this and maybe even learned something along the way. That's going to do it for me, guys. I will see you next time.